Hello, welcome student, and in the previous lectures we are discussed the biasing in the PN junction diodes. The PN junction diodes, it is the important property of that PN junction diodes is it has a resistance in the both, that is forward biasing and reverse biasing, which will be discussed in the previous lectures. It has a low resistance in the forward biasing, it has a large resistance in the reverse biasing modes. But in these lectures we are discuss the resistance and types of that resistance in the forward biasing modes. Then taking the heading resistance in diode, resistance in diodes. The most important property, one of the most important property of the diodes is its resistance in the forward mode and reverse bias mode. The most important property of diode is its resistance in forward bias mode, and reverse bias mode. And in these lectures we are discuss the resistance, the types of the resistance in the only forward bias modes. That is two types of the resistance, AC resistance and DC resistance. The DC resistance is also called as a static resistance, that is steady resistance, and the AC resistance is called as a dynamic resistance here. Okay, we are discussing the next part. Then the first we are discussed the most important property of the diode is a resistance in the forward as well as reverse bias mode. We are discussed the ideal diodes. When we taking the ideal diodes, in the ideal diodes they have zero resistance in a forward bias modes. In ideal diode, zero resistance in forward bias modes. I will be write the short form of forward, that is FB. That is not a Facebook. This is the forward bias. And in ideal diodes, it has a zero resistance in the forward biasing mode, and infinite resistance in reverse bias mode, that is RB mode. Reverse bias mode. In the ideal diodes, it has a zero resistance in the forward bias modes and infinite resistance in the reverse bias mode. We are discussed the high resistance in the reverse bias mode. It is the practical methods. This is not a practical, but in the practical methods we have just small amount of current will be flow through the junction, and this current is called as leakage current. We are discussed in the previous lectures here. Then I'll be drawn the characteristic diagram here. The vertical axis for current and horizontal axis for the voltage. Then this is the range of that current. The voltage will be increasing high, but current it must be zero. Voltage will increase high, the current must be zero. The when current केव्हा zero असते, जेव्हा infinite resistance असेल. Infinite resistance केव्हा असते, in the reverse bias mode. This will be ideal. This is the ideal. We have discussed about the ideal diodes. Then इफ द व्होल्टेज या ठिकाणी वाढत आहे अलॉंग द ॲक्सिस, बट करंट कसा आहे, झिरोचा आहे, आणि ह्याला काय म्हटलं जातं, दॅट इज आर बी इन अ रिव्हर्स बायस मोड, अँड अनदर वन इज दिस विल बी फॉरवर्ड बायस मोड. करंट व्होल्टेज काही नसताना देखील जे काही करंट आहे इट इज मस्ट बी हाय. दिस इज कॉल्ड ॲज फॉरवर्ड बायस मोड्स. अँड जस्ट डिस्कस द टाइप्स ऑफ two types of that resistance which in the diodes, two types of the resistance, that is, one is DC resistance. This is also called as static resistance. The first type of the resistance is, this is not we are discuss here. The first one is, that is static resistance. Static in the bracket, they also called as DC resistance. Static resistance and DC resistance, these both types of the resistance which can be discussed in here, these are about the forward biasing. When the PN junction diode in the forward biasing, they offer a definite resistance, is called as definite resistance in the circuit, is called as forward is called as static resistance. The amount of resistance or the resistance, the amount of resistance when of the PN junction diodes which can be kept in a forward biasing, they offer some resistance. Then when PN junction diode, when PN junction diode in FB, that means forward biasing modes, in FB, when the PN junction diode is kept in FB mode, that is forward biasing mode, they offers, they gives, they offers, diode offers some definite resistance, some definite resistance, some definite resistance is called static resistance. Static resistance or DC resistance, and they will be denoted as capital RG, denoted as capital and apostrophe small g. This is called a static resistance. When a PN junction diode in the forward bias mode, it offers some definite resistance in the circuit, some definite resistance in the circuit is called as this resistance is called as static resistance or DC resistance. And the DC resistance is, that is RG, and I will be right here. Then RG is equal to V upon I. This is Coulomb's law. It's not a Coulomb's law, Ohm's law. And this is ratio of RG, the static resistance, it is the ratio of DC voltage across the PN junction. The ratio of DC voltage, voltage across the junction, across diode, not a junction, across diode, to the current or DC current here, that is a DC current, DC current flowing through the diode at particular voltage, is called as, this is the ratio of DC voltage and DC current across the diode flow this at a particular voltage years. We can be applied the external particular voltage. This is the first type of the resistance which can be discussed as a static resistance or DC resistance when we are applied the forward biasing modes. The next one is, second one is dynamic resistance. Dynamic or AC resistance, that is dynamic resistance here. It is the reciprocal of, we can be used, we can be drawn or we can be calculate the slope from the IV characteristics. IV it means not a 4, this is IV, it means the current and voltage characteristics, and this will be denoted as RG is equal to, small rg is equal to delta V divided by delta I. It will change in voltage and change in current. It is depends upon the operating voltage. It's dynamic resistance is depends upon the operating voltage, and it is the reciprocal of, I will be said here. Consider, I will be drawn the graph, one of the graph. This is the graph of which one calculated. Consider this is the linear graph and this will be current and this is the voltage. ओके, आपण जे कॅरेक्टरिस्टिक स्टडी केलेला आहे त्यामध्ये अशा पद्धतीने थोडंसं जाऊन अचानक अशा पद्धतीने जे काही रिव्हर्स बायसिंग फॉरवर्ड बायसिंग आपण बघितलेलं आहे. देन आपण जेव्हा स्लोप काढत असतो, स्लोप कसे काढले जाते, देन स्लोप इज इक्वल टू y2 minus y1 upon x2 minus x1. y2 it means I2 minus I1, that is delta I, and it is delta V. This is the slope, and we can be taking the reciprocal of slope. Then the delta V goes to numerator and delta I comes back to the denominator as like this. And why I will be called this the reciprocal of slope of IV characteristics. Okay, please reminding for the MCQ. Okay, find the MCQ on this. The resistance is the important property. What is the resistance in the forward biasing when we are taking the ideal diodes? जर आपण फॉरवर्ड बायसिंग वापरत असाल तर आयडियल डायोड मध्ये रेजिस्टन्स किती असतो? देन द रेजिस्टन्स इन द आयडियल डायोड्स, if we are taking the forward biasing mode, this will be 0. In the reverse biasing mode, it will be infinite. The reciprocal of, that is the IV characteristic, the slope of IV characteristics is called as, option will be DC resistance, static resistance, and one another options, and last option is dynamic resistance or AC resistance. This is the correct answers. Then this is all about, we can be discuss the types of resistance in the diode which can be applied in a forward biasing mode. And the resistance, it is the most important property of the diodes. We are finished here. In the next lectures we are discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the semiconductor devices.